So what are we going to talk about today? I gave you a little snapshot, and what I'd like to do is kind of dive in. But let me give you a couple minute summary of what we're going to do today. And when we talk about this threat, we're not just going to be talking about it way up here. We're going to be talking about it down here at the local level. Can you come get this? But there are a couple things I want to lead off with, and those are maybe some really. I have one ground rule, but I want to just throw this up. How many of you have ever seen The Matrix? Raise your hand, please. For those of you at home, you don't have to actually raise your hand because I can't see you. Now, this is important because this is actually deadly serious. In the last 5 to 8 years, as I've gone around the country and briefed members of Congress, heads of intelligence agencies, all retired, of course, law enforcement, civilians, church leaders, business leaders, there are a couple of common threads that I've experienced. Number one, the vast majority of people in law enforcement and the intelligence community do not know about what we're going to talk about today. They don't know it. And there's a reason for that. And that is going to be the focus of everything we do today. But the other thing is, once you hear this information, in my professional and personal opinion, you cannot be static. Once you know this information, you have to get involved, I believe. It's hard to imagine that people hear the information and then walk out the door, but many do, and they do nothing, including military people, law enforcement, whatever, because it is overwhelming. And what I've realized over the years is when I was in the FBI and after 9/11 began working cases that laid out a specific threat from certain groups, it turned out through investigation that a number of Islamic groups in the United States were in one way or another funding or supporting, one way or another, guys who were trying to do acts of jihad here. Terrorism is what some people call it. They're acts of jihad. And these groups were all linked. And they were linked in many ways. A number of people, less than 100 back then, had been the leadership of probably 2 or 3 dozen Islamic organizations. It's kind of classic insurgency, classic front groups. And over a period of a couple years, through these investigations, it became very clear that the most prominent Islamic organizations in the United States are in fact controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood. And then we had a trial in Texas that was adjudicated in 2008, which we're going to go through, that definitively hammered that home. And in fact, if you just take the top 8 or 10 Islamic organizations in North America, in the United States, it's those organizations primarily that the U.S. government is working with at the national, state, and local level. State houses the Congress, the State Department, the CIA, the FBI, DHS, across the board, the Agricultural Department, NASA, you name it. These are the groups. The religious organizations, the media organizations look to them for answers, and they're all Muslim Brotherhood. That's not an opinion, though that's where the facts lay on the table. Which leads me to my next point. And this is really my only ground rule. I'm here to lay out facts for you. If, when you're done here today, you say, I don't believe any of that, or I don't believe most of that, I think it's overblown, that's okay with me. My job's done. My job here is to lay this out for you, and you're all adults, you're smart people, the people watching are smart people, they'll either take it or leave it. However, these are facts. Most of what we're going to show today is evidence that's already been entered into a federal trial, and several federal trials, and documents that are real. And they very clearly state who the Muslim Brotherhood is, what they're doing, and why they're doing it. So, you remember this scene when Morpheus is sitting there and he's got the red pill and the blue pill, right? And if you take the red pill, you get the truth. And you can never go back, because the world is a different place once you understand the nature of the threat. And the nature of this threat we're talking about here today is significant. It's controlled at an international level, and we're going to talk about that right up front, who the players are and how they interact. So I would encourage you, if you don't understand this threat and you really don't want your world to be impacted, those of you in the room here, I'd encourage you to leave, and those of you watching at home, I'd encourage you to close your computer or whatever and go about your day. But now, where we are after several years of working on Capitol Hill and working in state legislators and working with business leaders and religious leaders, there is a growing group of leaders in the country, a very small group, but a growing group who has decided they are going to risk everything to speak the truth and to do what's right for this country. Those courageous men and women are doing it, and we'll talk about some of those things today. Is that fair start?
Yes.
So we already did the ground rule. First of all, if there's no problem, then what we're doing here today is we're just up here chatting. So let's just ask the question. How many of you think there is a problem with something called the Islamic movement, maybe the Muslim Brotherhood?
You got to keep it in the left frame.
Okay, so that's, for those of you at home, that's almost everybody in the room raised their hand. So let's look. I like to start with this guy. This is Abdurrahman al-Moody. Who is Abdurrahman al-Moody? Well, he was the most prominent Islamic leader in the United States in the 90s and into the early 2000s. He was the leader or founder of almost 24 of the largest Islamic groups in North America. He was the Islamic advisor to President Clinton and Vice President Gore. He was a goodwill ambassador for the State Department, who actually participated in the Middle East peace process on behalf of the US government. He worked with the Department of Education and the ACLU to screen what went into US public textbooks about Islam. And in 2003, at Heathrow Airport in London, he was arrested with $340,000 cash that he received from Muammar Gaddafi of Libya for the global jihad. He was implicated in a plot with 2 UK-based al-Qaeda operatives to kill Saudi Crown Prince, who then became King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. This is the guy that created the Muslim chaplain program for DoD, for the Department of Defense. He created the American Muslim Armed Forces Veterans Affairs Council, that guy. So let me give you a little summary. The guy who was the Islamic advisor to the President of the United States, who created the Muslim chaplain program for the Department of Defense, who worked with the State Department in advising and pushing forth U.S. policy, pled guilty in the Eastern District of Virginia in 2004 and is now in prison. He is a Muslim Brother and Hamas operative, and he is a financier for al-Qaeda, per the U.S. government prosecutors. That guy. So an al-Qaeda guy founded the Muslim chaplain program for the Department of Defense. An al-Qaeda guy was the advisor to the President of the United States. An al-Qaeda guy worked with the Department of Education on what we put in our textbooks about Islam. Now, if that was going on, do you think that's the only problem inside the system?
No.
But that's pretty telltale. You're right, sir. It's not the only problem. But that's very telling, correct? So let's look at a couple others. But first, just so you don't think I'm making that up, there he is. Now, for those of you who want to point fingers and say, well, you see, the Democrat Party falls for that kind of stuff. But we don't fall for that. For those of you that are Republicans, I wouldn't fall. My party doesn't fall. Well, I'm sorry to say, you're wrong. Okay? They are ingrained inside both parties, and the Muslim Brotherhood knows exactly how to operate inside the Democrat Party. They know what buttons to push and how to get themselves inside. With the Democrat Party, it's normally civil rights issues and other issues associated with that. On the Republican side, they try to put it in terms of fiscal issues and always wrapping it in the flag. You know, equal rights, justice, freedom for everyone. These are Muslim brothers, and obviously that guy is a terrorist. Let's call him what he is. He's a jihadi.
That's right.
Because he's al-Qaeda. Anybody know who that guy is? That's Anwar al-Awlaki. He's no longer with us because the president ordered a missile strike on him and he was blown up. He was killed. Well, where was he after 9/11? Anybody know?
Pakistan?
Inside the U.S. Capitol, leading prayers and giving talks on Islam. And after that, where was he? Inside the Pentagon, being hosted at a meal with mid-level managers in the Pentagon because he was such a moderate Muslim. And he was the leader of the Dar al-Hijra in Falls Church, Virginia, one of the most powerful Muslim Brotherhood jihadi mosques in the United States. That's the guy. Now, people will argue, especially people that are now embarrassed that they had lunch with him, will argue, well, he wasn't radical in 02, 03, 04, 2001. I'm sorry to say the evidence actually doesn't bear that out. That's the guy. Let's see if we have another. Now, that was way back in 2001, and people normally say, well, that was a long time ago. That stuff doesn't happen anymore. Now, we could spend the next half hour or 3 hours going through the number of people that have been in the U.S. Capitol who are terrorists. But let me just go to April 2010. For those of you not aware, Roll Call is the official media outlet for the U.S. Capitol. And here on their website, they show this April 2010. This man leading prayers and giving a talk that's inside the U.S. Capitol. His name was Anwar Hajjaj. You probably never heard of him. A lot of people haven't. But he was the leader of Taiba International, a designated terrorist organization by the United States and the United Nations. I'm not sure what you got to do to get designated to be a terrorist organization by the United Nations, but it's got to be pretty bad. And that his organization that he was the executive director of, for funding, sending money to Hamas and Al-Qaeda, that guy is standing in 2010 inside the Capitol. And his organization was designated shortly after 9/11. So it's not like, oh, well, we didn't know. The question is, how is this happening? Siraj Wahaj, the first Muslim imam to lead prayers inside the U.S. House of Representatives, on the floor of the House, unindicted co-conspirator in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and testified as a character witness for the blind sheikh. Here's a question. We really haven't even started talking about the Muslim Brotherhood yet. Do you think we could just keep terrorists out of our government spaces? This is appalling. And since 9/11, as many of you know, nobody's been fired, except one or two military generals for trying to do their jobs. Nobody's been held accountable for this inside our system. To call this appalling, I think, is undershooting the mark by a large amount. How is all of this possible? Well, it could be because the Congressional Muslim Staff Association on Capitol Hill, a Muslim Brotherhood organization, is the one vetting the people that come speak. How about a little of that? How about Parvez Ahmed, the chairman of the board for Hamas in the United States from 2004 to 2008, Hamas Front Group, Council on American Islamic Relations. If you were not aware that CARE is Hamas, trust me, we will nail that down here this morning. He was their chairman for 4 years almost. He's now the Human Rights Commissioner for Jacksonville, Florida. These are just some examples.